I'm Sherry Martel. I'm the Executive Director of the Truro Colchester Chamber. For those of you who I haven't had an opportunity to meet yet, we're all going to be friends after this, I'm sure. And we have about 475 members in the Truro Colchester area. During this pandemic, we have been supporting the business community in a number of ways. Certainly one is our role as an advocate for business, where we're connecting on a daily basis with government and sending information that our businesses are sharing with us to the different levels so that they have an idea of what impacts that this pandemic is having on the business community. Our other commitment to the community is that we are providing accurate, reliable, timely information to our business community. So myself and our 2 staff members are continuously updating our website, our social media platforms, and sending out newsletters to our members with the most up-to-date current information that we have, so that if people have questions, that they are able to get answers as quickly as possible when the information is available. So in addition to that, we're promoting Shop Local. We're trying to keep people connected to their communities and giving them different ways to do that. And part of what we're also doing, again, is getting information into the hands of people who need it. So this webinar is focused on employment issues and HR issues. So we have joining us today Anna Marie Manley, an associate with Patterson Law, and Dennis James, also of Patterson Law, and both of them work in the labor and employment field. We also have Stephen McKellar and Craig Sanchez, who are with the HR and payroll company PayWorks. So we'll start off by having Dennis and Anna talk to us a little bit about their roles and how that fits with what's going on right now.
Thank you, Sherry. So we're all in this big boat together and nobody can get out until we can all get out. So what we've been trying to do is we're in this is just try to apply our experience and principles to a situation for which there is no clear reported case law, and there are some guiding principles that will deal with this in terms of workplace safety, employment rights, and that sort of thing. But you will not find readily cases dealing with what do you do in the middle of a pandemic. So the advice that we've been trying to deal with our clients and both the employers and employees is, some practical solutions as you work through this, and some things to consider, and factors that you need to take into account as a business person or as an employee, deciding whether and how you continue your workforce, or whether you have an obligation and a right to refuse to show up to work or try to modify your work conditions. So that's what we've been trying to do over the last 5 to 6 weeks as this has been unfolding.
Great. Anna, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think Dennis has given a good intro there. The other thing I guess we've been trying to do as well is stay on top of what the government has been telling us, both the federal government and the provincial government, and the information that's being provided through them.
Now, I heard an analogy the other day said by the Minister of Economic Development, Melanie Joly, who said that it's like building a plane and flying it at the same time. There's certainly a lot of ongoing changes as announcements are made and unfolding, that it's ever evolving. So staying on top is certainly a job that we look to folks like yourselves to help us with. Stephen, could you share a little bit about your role and how you're supporting business through this?
Yeah, definitely. So can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Sure you can hear me. Okay.
Yep.
Perfect. I've been on a couple of these meetings where I've been muted, and you sort of go on and you can tell by the looks of people's faces, they can't hear a word I'm saying. No, but I appreciate everybody taking some time, and Sherry for, letting us come and kind of help support the membership and all of our clients. I mean, we're really doing the same thing. You're trying to keep up with the information that's coming in at a rapid rate from government and from industry. What we're really doing right now with a lot of our clients, obviously we're getting a lot of questions with records of employment and processing records of employment. And then, of course, when the original 10% wage subsidy was announced, it was, okay, what are you going to be able to do for us, you know, as a client, or even if you're not a client, you know, can you help us navigate this and explain to us what we're going to need to do? And then, of course, the 75% was rolled out later. So now it's sort of dealing with, okay, how do these two work together? So we're fielding lots of questions from clients and partners about these types of things, and then also specifically HR. Now, as you mentioned at the beginning of the call, with all things HR, you know, you can give advice. And what we do, actually, our clients, we have HR advisory services through a third party. So if they're looking for templates and things like that, that's fine. But really, you know, broad scope, it's some of the questions that you had sent. So what do we do with employees that, you know, they aren't comfortable coming to work? You know, what types of leaves might be available? What should we do as an employer? Who can we go to kind of get some sound advice during this time? Because in a lot of cases, it's difficult to get people on the phone. So occupational health and safety and different standards groups, I mean, it's always recommended, hey, if you can't resolve things internally, you know, maybe we can reach out to these folks. But then, of course, it's, okay, how backed up are the queues, and when are we going to be able to get a hold of someone? So it's sort of managing that with clients and partners, and we're doing the best we can.
Wonderful. And I know Craig Sanchez, also from PayWorks, is also on the call. Was there anything you wanted to add to that, Craig? I think
we'll see if Craig's on. I think he's with us too. I'm trying to see if he had called me right before I joined, and I said, yeah, I'm jumping on, and I kind of hung up. So perhaps he was looking for some technical assistance.
Okay. Yeah. No, I see him on there, but I don't know if he can hear us.
Okay. So Craig is, I'll speak a little bit for Craig, Sherry. Craig would be my manager. Craig is also with PayWorks. He's been in the payroll HR business for a number of years now. I won't call him old, but I suppose this would be a good time too, because he can't, you know, he can't yell back at me. But Craig definitely has a lot of experience in dealing with all things HR and payroll. And he'll be a resource as well. So anything that comes up offline, Sherry, or any questions that come up that we may not be able to answer, and there are a few things ROE related and whatnot that I do have some information I can send after the call. So by all means, if you know anything we're talking about, we'll be able to recap after the call and send out some info.
Okay, so while we start some questions, maybe I'll direct the first one over to Dennis and Anna Marie, and then maybe you can, you know, work your magic through email there with Craig to get him fixed up.
Sure.
Okay, so Dennis, so we've been given some examples from businesses that their staff have come to them and, you know, made demands that they want barriers installed for frontline staff at point of sale between staff and customers. So what are the guidelines, the laws around that right now as far as our businesses required to do this?
Well, what businesses are required to do, as everybody would be aware, is to maintain an appropriate physical distance, and that includes distance from your clients. If that can't be achieved physically, then you have to look at other options to achieve the same effect. And what this is really informed by is the employer's obligation to maintain a safe workplace. And so while there may not be immediate guidance, because we haven't seen a lot of proactive advice from occupational health safety or labor standards in terms of what to do in this situation. So unfortunately, it's going to, I suspect it'll play out by way of complaint. So to be proactive, I think what you have to do is pay attention to the guidelines. If you can't achieve the separation that's required, you have to come up with reasonable alternatives. And if you can't achieve that, then the employee has a right to refuse to work in a unsafe work environment if they deem it to be such reasonably considered. So make sure you're doing all the things aside from the barrier that you can. If it's just physically impossible, not in your workplace, then you are going to have to install something physically that can give the protection. And we've seen it all around town. whether you're going to Sobeys and Sobeys are superstores and seeing the plastic shields in front of cashiers now, or whether you go into restaurants, and I've seen improvised version of plastic sheeting, clear plastic sheeting just dropped over by the cash register. But those are real obligations if you are not able to maintain reasonably that separation distance. Short of that, you have to be mindful that, as I said, if you don't achieve that, then an employee has a right to say, until you do so, I'm refusing to come into the workplace, and you're going to have to address it that way. So I think it's important. And I think the larger point, Sherry, is the advice I've been trying to give to people is work with your employees, because they may see things play out in your business that you don't necessarily see play out in the same way. So if you have an occupational health and safety committee, if you don't, if your workforce is smaller, go through the analysis of the business, look at what are the potential risks, and make sure everybody's buying into the strategies to the extent that's possible, and know that they are real and that they can't be waived. And I know one of the things that have come up, not necessarily in small businesses, but in businesses that are deemed to be exempt under the public health order. And what I warn people is, just simply because your business has been exempted, so you're deemed as an essential, doesn't mean you can ignore the other guidelines that are still out there to inform what your obligations are to establish a safe work environment. So if physical barriers, if plastic or some other barrier is not available, then you have to look at how your customers are accessing the store. So if the customers are, if you can't achieve it in your store, then you may have to leave the customer outside while you gather things. And I know some stores are doing that they have a barrier so that you can only go so far. You place your order, you stand back, it's brought to the table. So any way that you can, you have to think it through, and it's better to have your team on side with you than wondering whether you've done enough and are satisfying their legitimate concerns.
Wonderful. And a follow-up to that, I know it's early days, because really the unanswerable question is, how long will this last? But employers are also wondering, with regards to personal protective equipment, when the startup starts again, what will be required of business at that point?
Anna Marie and I were talking about this before, because thank you for the questions that you did get ahead of time. A lot of our answers will sound the same in terms of, you're going to have to look at what public health guidelines are. And and I noticed that some jurisdictions like BC and California are starting to look at establishing frameworks for businesses in terms of what will inform a reopening. And so I think they are going to bring in some of the standards that we're talking about in general terms, so that businesses will still have a requirement to maintain some of these barriers, whether it's protective equipment. It'll be a work site specific basis. And I think you're going to get the same sort of principles to say, here's what is expected. This is what will inform your obligation as an employer to ensure a safe work environment. So whether it's, so I don't think you're going to see anything different in the reopening that you shouldn't be considering now. And that's what I say, if you can't achieve physical separation, then you have to look at other strategies, whether it's how you stage your customers coming in, whether it's providing protective equipment to your employees so that they can work safely, gloves, sanitization, all those strategies. I don't think the question is going to be much different in the immediate reopening as it is now if you're trying to stay in business. So those factors will come in place and largely be guided by Dr. Strang and his team and Dr. Tam and her team nationally. That's where you're going to be looking to inform your decisions as an employer as to, and then apply them in your workplace. And again, really can't emphasize enough the need to make sure your employees are buying into this, because they see your workplace in a different way than you may see it.
Great. Well, thank you for that wonderful answer. So I'm going to direct a question now to Steve or Craig with PayWork. So certainly issuing records of employment has been a challenge for businesses. Some haven't had to register for them for years and were challenged by using an online portal with CRA that they have that requires it to be set up in advance, and then you have to receive a code. I guess, could you speak a little bit about, if you don't have access to the record of employment online platform through CRA, or you're not using the services of a payroll company right now, what are some of your options? And maybe you could walk us through that record of employment platform, if you have any information that you can share on that, on how it works with them.
Yeah, definitely. So with records of employment, now, unfortunately, if you are not filing via ROE Web, or you're not using a provider that's doing this electronically, then you would have to do it with paper copy. And these paper copy records of employment are issued by the Employer Contact Center from CRA. So you're kind of in a position now where you would have to call, and I can provide you with this information and provide you with the number, definitely, but they literally would have to call a line, and they would have to have these paper copy records of employment delivered to them. And then they would have there would be a process in which they would follow to fill out the record of employment. They would then give a copy to their employee, who would take it to Service Canada. They would keep a copy for their records and send one in. So I really hate to say it, but filing via the web or finding a way to do that, it really is the quickest way possible, because when you're looking at the paper copy, that's why there's still kind of a stigma from employees, even when they're using a payroll company, that, hey, I need to have a copy of that record of employment. But the reality is that when it's processed through a system, it's going to get to Service Canada faster than you can bring it down there in your hand and get processed quicker that way. So, so yes, there is the ability to process paper copy records of employment if they already have those ordered, or they have those somewhere in the filing cabinet from when they opened. There's step by step. We can send out information on how they fill out those forms. I can send a link for sure. But other than that, I would encourage them to look at, or, by all means, reach out to me, even if it's not, not to try and get them as a Payworks client. It has nothing to do with that, but just to kind of coach them through, okay, here's, why you might want to look at ROE Web, or here's some links and ways that you can look at doing this online. It's a big, obviously there was a lot of records of employment processed across the country, and probably across the world, but it is big. And we've found that the feedback that we've gotten from our clients that are able to process them immediately is that it kind of lurks in the shadows, but it really meant a lot to them and to their employees, because of course their employees are counting on that to be able to get the benefits that they're looking for during this time. So I would just, echo what Dennis says. It's really about what you can do for your employees during this time. So when we talk about personal protective equipment, it's, yes, we can refer to occupational health standards, or if they don't have a department or a team doing that internally, they can reach out for help. But I think the reality right now is that any type of investigation, if you did have somebody come in, there's probably quite a backlog. So I think it's about trying to work with your team to mitigate their concerns if possible. And, if you're unable to do that or come to a common agreement, then there's a few other options out there, like an emergency leave. So again, this is not me saying that I would recommend businesses do this, but one of the things they're looking at is, okay, if we can't find an agreement to get you back to work, if you're not comfortable, you can look at different emergency leave provisions and things like that. So that's always an option, or something that the employer can recommend, of course, providing that they're already doing what they can to make these employees feel comfortable. And then it gets back to, okay, what's the nature of the job that we're talking about here? So
that's a great lead into the next question, Stephen. So this one, again, was submitted in advance, and Dennis or Stephen, maybe we'll go to Dennis first and then come back to you, Stephen. So what is the duty to accommodate when an employer is keeping their office open and an employee would rather work from home, given that they are too nervous to be there due to the virus?
Okay, so a couple important concepts here is, first of all, whatever decision you're making, you have to have some objective basis. So the Human Rights Act also contains a provision that says you can't discriminate for even an irrational fear of disease. And so that's a factor here. And frankly, based on the information and the speed of the information, there's probably nothing irrational about anybody's fear these days. And there's a psychological overlay to how people translate. Some people are able to process it, understand the risks, and come to work and they're fine. Other people will take the same information and process it a different way. And you have to respect both perspectives to the extent that you can. So that's really important to understand and avoid the harsh judgment of someone saying, I'm just too nervous to be there. So I think you start from that concept and then you go and say, all right, what is the job? Can the job be done remotely and viably? So you don't have to, as an employer, you don't have to pay for a remote status. And I'm going to get Anna Marie just to chime in when I'm finished here, because she can talk about the wage subsidy and how that may impact your thinking. But you don't have to, as in normal terms, pay someone if it can't be viable for your business. So you have to assess it. And then you have to assess whether you can achieve that on a full-time basis or a part-time basis. And if you can achieve it as a part-time basis, then that's really what you would be expected to offer. You wouldn't be expected to do more than what is economically viable for your business. And if the practical conclusion is the nature of the work doesn't allow for remote duty, then that's what you can do. You've as long as you've got the objective assessment, you don't have to go beyond that. And in that case, then it's really about understanding that the employee is off on a leave. And I wouldn't do, and I've been cautioning people, you don't want to do much more these days, but then to tolerate an unpaid leave subject to the wage subsidy, which Anna Maria will get into. But it's really important to respect employees' rights not to attend, even if you feel that you've done everything possible. Now, where it may affect the employee down the road is under these current programs, they may have to demonstrate that they had a basis not to show up. And if they don't have an objective underlying condition, they may have to convince someone in operating or administering the CERB program that there was a reasonable basis for their refusal to show up. But that's a discussion I'm encouraging employers to leave between them and Service Canada or whoever else is administering the program. From your point of view, as an employer, go as far as you can. If you can't viably keep work remote, then accept it as an unpaid leave and look at other strategies while your employee is off on that leave. So Anna Marie, I'm just going to get you to weigh in the wage subsidy programs and see how that may impact employers as well.
Sure. So, and I guess the other thing that it wasn't directly related to the question, but I just add is that it may be that you need to explore a little bit with the employee why they're not coming in. It may be that they have an underlying health condition, or it may be that there's a specific thing kind of tying back to the PPE at the workplace that they're uncomfortable with. And that if you're able to address that, maybe they would be willing to return to the workplace. In terms of the programs available, so the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy is the big one that's recently been elaborated on a lot in the past few days. So that's the 75% wage subsidy that you've probably heard about. It's up to $847 per week for up to 12 weeks. Now, there is that requirement to show the loss of profit, and there's some specific rules around that it's probably, I won't go through right now, but they are available, and we have a document that has some links to some of the government information on some of that. Now, the government, if you look through some of those documents, they've specifically provided examples where employees are what they call furloughed. Effectively, the employee is home. They're not working. But they are still eligible. The employer is still eligible to use this Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy if they want to cover the 75% of their salary. even if the employee is not actively performing work for the employer. Now, they haven't gone so far as to say that the employer has to use the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy for employees who are home but not working. They've just provided an example as an option that you can if you choose to. The other consideration, obviously, is treating all your workforce, taking a look at your workforce as a whole, and investigating your options for making sure things are fair between employees, so you don't have some employees receiving some benefits and others not if they're doing the same work or they have the same restrictions on what work they're allowed to do. In terms of other subsidies, there is also this temporary wage subsidy for employers. That's the 10%, and that's a little broader in terms of who might be eligible for it, although there are certain restrictions on the types of corporations that can apply. There is also a cap per employer of $25,000. And that can be done through reducing current federal, provincial, or territorial income tax. So that's done when the employer is remitting their taxes. They can take off that temporary wage subsidy amount. So that's something to look into as well if you're considering using subsidies to cover part of your employee wages.
Okay, and Stephen, did you want to weigh in on that?
Sure, yeah. So it's going to echo what we've already heard in terms of accommodating employees and really educating yourself on how employees are taking this. But to keep with the 10% wage subsidy, that calculation basically is something that we have the 10% wage subsidy calculator built into the system. I mean, I know, Sherry, you guys are users. You might have seen it already, but it's a matter of checking the box, and it's going to do that calculation for you, and then that's going to, of course, reduce the amount of remittances that are going to be going to the CRA. And then it'll report on what should have been going, because of course there will be an obligation to track that and to be able to show, you know, what you've done down the line. So we're definitely hearing a lot of positive feedback from clients on that. But back into employees coming to work or feeling comfortable at work or not, I think it was very important what Ann had mentioned about, you know, why are they not coming in? So can't stress enough, as Dennis had said, how important it is to really try and get on that same level as your employees right now, figure out what's making them uncomfortable, why they're uncomfortable, and then that may lead into an opportunity to maybe educate them on, okay, well, here's our position in the market, or here's, you know, given the nature of the job or given what we're doing, here's what we are trying to do as a company to make this better. And I think that the more that employees are educated, I mean, even right now being in industry, it feels like things change every day and you don't know where to look always for resources. I mean, that's why the chamber is fantastic for that, because you guys do such a great job at keeping things updated, you know, all the time, which is wonderful. But I think a lot of employees, sometimes, again, you don't know what you don't know, and you don't always feel comfortable, you know, admitting that. So I think that employers being able to educate their employees at this time is super important, and be there for them to let them know what programs and things are available to them.
Okay, wonderful. So, and that kind of leads into our next question that I'll ask, and then we did have a few questions that were submitted, and based on our time, we will have some time to take questions from those on this call. So employees who have been laid off originally when things were first announced with the state of emergency, some employers are trying to recall them, and yet employees are refusing to go. So what can employers do to encourage more staff to return to work when they're being called upon to do so? So we'll start with Dennis, and then we'll come back to you, Steve.
Well, aside from the obvious of, affecting wages or something like that, it is that assurance about the safety of your workplace, and the work is available and that can be achieved within the public health guidelines. I mean, that's really the key message that you have to tell the employees, is that the work is there, you can do it safely, and, and then there's no objective reason why it should be refused. And if that continues, then aside from increasing wage payments or things like that, the only other aspect that they have to consider is whether CERB would be available to them. Because, and I don't know what level of screening, and I'm assuming with the level of application that a number of applications that are being dealt with, that there's not a lot of screening.
I don't think there's really any at this point.
But there has been some messaging that maybe afterwards they might go back and look and say, was it necessary that you took that leave off? I think anybody has to be very careful in doing that analysis, but it is a risk that the employer can talk to the employee about, because the employer doesn't have to endorse, for instance, that the claim that they had to stay from work because of COVID-19. If their workplace is safe, if there's work there, the employer can take their position that she's tried everything possible and to make sure that she's had a safe workplace for the employees. And then it's really an employee decision, and it's for that employee to process it on that basis. So I think engaging in that discussion, making sure that you're not filling out information on ROE forms that don't reflect what's your workplace. Don't feel that you are obligated to echo that there's a legitimate COVID-19 coding here if you feel that everything in your workplace has been safe and you're trying to get them back, or trying to discourage them from employees from not working. After that, it's really the employee call. So I won't go through the litany of incentives you can put in there, but from a practical point of view, in terms of trying to ensure your workplace is safe and that there's work to be done, those are the key messages. And whatever assurance that you can walk your employees through to accomplish that, that's important. If at the end of the day they're still refusing, I'm still exercising to clients caution about saying, in normal circumstances, if someone doesn't show up and refuses, then obviously you're going to make decisions that may end the relationship. Don't be doing that readily in these circumstances because of, again, there's legitimate psychological overlay here in terms of how we all process this, and not one of us will see it in the same exact way. So I think you have to be tolerant, respect that they're just not comfortable, and you may have to look to other people, other ways of getting other people doing the work if you can't get your employees back on a temporary basis.
Okay. Did you want to add anything, Anna?
I can just to explain a little bit, the gray area we're seeing with the CERB or the CERB is that they've explicitly said that employees who have resigned from their position are not eligible for the CERB. What they haven't said is employees who elect to take leave of absence and what their eligibility is. So in some ways that's similar to somebody who's resigned because they're electing or choosing not to work. So that's where we see the potential concern about them not being eligible. And I don't know that that's clear to a lot of employees when they're looking at the form, because it just kind of gives a little list of here's the 5 kind of standard examples that they've been giving each time, and it doesn't address that particular situation. So there may be a lot of employees who just don't, and I mean a lot of employers as well, a lot of everybody who doesn't understand what their status will be with the CERB, but I think it's just important that they understand there is a risk that they're not eligible for it. So even if they're given it right now, they may be required to pay it back down the road if Service Canada or the CRA looks into this further. And not that I think that's just part of the conversation to have with an employee, so that they understand that maybe they can't just take this $2,000 a month for the next 3 months and they'll be fine. That may be something that they should consider when they're deciding whether they want to return or not.
So is it important for an employer to get, a statement from an employee who doesn't want to return to work? Should they get something in writing?
I think from their point of view, they should put in writing what their perspective is, right? So if they're emailing, if they're communicating, I think it should be clear to the employee everything that's been done to ensure that the work can be done safely. And that I'm encouraging employers not to simply by default put an ROE coding that you know is not reflective of your business, you know, for the sake of enabling that, because we don't know down the road what sort of audit will be done. And I don't want to raise a specter, but we just don't know, right? And so in normal times, I tell people, don't put things on an ROE that aren't true. So don't think, and this is a gray area that I think Anna Marie is well defined, is we don't know what will happen to that case where someone is on a leave of absence, unpaid, that you're respecting, and they put and assert that somehow they couldn't return. And maybe they can convince, we don't know that, but from an employer, record what you've done, make sure that you've engaged employees to the extent that you can, anticipated all their concerns. And if there's a refusal, make sure that there's a summary of everything you've done and that works there, and that it's their choice.
Wonderful. So Stephen, was there anything you wanted to chime in on that?
I mean, a lot of it, Dennis has obviously already said. You know, as it relates to records of employment, I know that the Canadian Payroll Association has a few documents available there, just kind of letting employers know. For example, the Block 16, the reason for issuing their ROE will be important. So, for example, if an employee was under quarantine due to COVID-19 or self-quarantine, and an ROE was issued, it could be code number D for illness or injury, for example. If they are sent home because the company's temporary closing or something like that, you know, it could be code A, shortage of work or end of contract of the season. So it is important for employers to be paying attention if they are processing records of employment, making sure that they're entering the correct code. And they're also, the Canadian Payroll Association is also encouraging folks when issuing the record of employment not to complete Block 18, the comment section, just because some comments will be removed from the ROE during the automation process and it'll slow down the claims process. So, you know, it's just a little advice from the Canadian Payroll Association as it relates to records of employment. But back to Dennis and Ann's point on the CERB, it's again back to educating employees and saying, you know, if you do not feel comfortable, so granted that all the kind of boxes are being ticked and they're doing everything they can to help their employees, or you know, maybe they have an employee assistance program or something like that, and if an employee is still not comfortable, they can educate them on, okay, here's what your options are for a potential leave or an unpaid leave or what have you. But again, equally important for them to understand those implications and understand that just because you're getting this right now, you know, if and when things are audited, that, you know, you may or may not qualify, right? So I guess just important for employees not to assume that, you know, it's just going to be a free-for-all sort of thing. So it's again just back to educating the employees, and that's really all that an employer can do at this point. This
is great information for business to have. So I'll move on to the next question that was submitted ahead of time, and it's in regards to the 75% wage subsidy. So it's a little bit of a long question. I know our participants have it, and our speakers have it in front of them. So I'll read the question for our participants. We are a retail business with 3 different payroll accounts and locations throughout the province. Many of our staff are part-timers who are only a little bit above minimum wage. There are 2 owners and at least 2 managers who will benefit from the 75% wage subsidy versus the CERB $2,000 every 4-week benefit. All staff have been provided with records of employment and laid off. So the question is, are they able to rehire only those who would benefit from the wage subsidy and have part-time staff remain laid off at the same time?
So I'm going to let Anna Marie, because there's an overlay with the CERB program, and she's been more involved in the details of that program than I have.
So essentially the wage subsidy, which I think we touched on a little bit earlier, doesn't obligate the employer to rehire employees. They can, the primary purpose of that program, and part of the reason, from my understanding, and part of the reason they've allowed it to apply even when an employee is furloughed or not actively working, is they want to maintain that employment relationship And they want to have the employer and the employee still feel like there's that employment connection, even while the business is closed or while it's not being fully staffed. What employers want to be careful of is that they have a rationale for which employees that they're bringing back on through this Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy and which employees are staying on the CERB or the CERB. And in this case, if they've got that financial rationale and they're not discriminating between the two managers, I don't see anything in what the government has released on the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy that would preclude them from doing that. Just a couple notes, they have said through the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy that employers are expected to make best efforts to pay the remaining 25% of an employee's salary if they bring someone back. What that means, we don't entirely know yet, whether they're going to be looking at the employer's financial situation and assessing whether they should have been paying that 25%, or whether that means it's just, you're ticking a little box saying that you've made your best efforts, or whether it's just a moral obligation they're putting out there. It's not entirely clear what that is, but that's just something to keep in mind. And then looking at, again, where there's two managers there and there's two part-time staff, there is that demarcation, but if you've got, for example, some employees you want to bring back and not others, just make sure you're not doing that on some kind of basis that might be protected under the Human Rights Act, or that you've got some kind of rationale for doing that. So maybe you're looking at your most senior employees first, or maybe you're looking at employees who perform some functions but not others. But just making sure there's a practical and supportable rationale for how you're choosing to go about doing that.
Thank you so
Sure,
much for that.
If I can just add one context, and it takes it back to the first session that we did with you in terms of, remember at common law, so outside the code, there is no such thing as a layoff, and it could trigger a claim of constructive dismissal.
Any absence.
Any absence. So my experience right now, or our collective experience right now, is everybody gets we're in the same boat, and we're not hearing at all much pushback from employees on that. But if you get into the points that Anna Marie's talk about, where you're making decisions that can't be objectively justified between the employees, that's when you're tempting the fate that one, for instance, you may have someone who's worked for you 5 years later or longer, but you hire a junior person. That's when you're starting to tempt fate that maybe they're going to say, then this is not just about COVID-19. You like that person better than you like me, and I'm not going to put up with this. So you have to be really careful right now. I think everybody accepts we're in this, and there's not a lot of options, and they accept that employers are doing everything possible to keep their businesses going. But just be careful for the reasons Anna Marie told you. If you're deciding on who you're going to pull back, and it's not everybody, make sure there's a good basis for the decisions you've made.
So in our understanding is there's certainly the two streams related to the wage subsidy, where one is the 75% and one is the 10%. So maybe Stephen, if you want to touch on perhaps some of the employees they would be recalling might qualify under one and not the other, or both.
Yeah, this is where it's a real gray area, and we're going to have some more. I'm hoping by the end of this week. They're working on more of a guideline, like more of a document to help navigate this. But I guess I'll do my best to kind of explain my understanding of the overlap with the 75% and the 10%, and what do we do here. So with the 10%, we're looking at, for example, a business that would normally they would have to remit certain taxes to the CRA. Now those taxes are going to be less. So business is operating, they're still deducting from the employees as they would be, or whomever's working. It's just they would not have to remit as much as they normally would with the 10% subsidy. What happens though when we dip into the 75% is they can no longer manage that just through their remittances, because the 75% they're going to be getting, in some cases, there's going to be more than what they would normally remit as a business, right? So there's no way, like, how do you track that? So I'm waiting for a little more clarification, but I think what you'll see is the 10% can still be processed right through payroll, and then that 10% would factor to the 75 for the employer on a on another level, but I am waiting for some clarification on that. That's really all I know about it so far. And in terms of the question, or if the question that was just brought up, if they can do that and bring back only certain employees, I think it's just to echo what was already said, the key word is rationale. I mean, if it's rational and if it makes sense and they can show a case for that, and of course be mindful of, okay, could it be seen that I'm bringing this person back for this particular reason or that particular reason? They really, they need to be very mindful of that. So I think the rationale is key there.
Okay, thank you so much for those answers. So we do have a couple of questions here. Linda, who's on the call with us, she asked about what about not being able to come to work because of childcare is not available? Linda, did you want to expand on that question? You can unmute and ask the question yourself. Linda, are you there? Okay, so Dennis, maybe we'll start with you. I think CERB guidelines have been pretty clear on the fact that you can be entitled if you're not able to work because of childcare, whether you're self-employed or qualify for EI. But please share whatever information you might be able to have to answer that question.
Right. So I'll let Anna Marie lead in terms of the CERB, but in terms of the tolerance of employee absence, this is different from what we were talking about earlier when we were saying they're too nervous. Or some subjective view. This is a clear case of objective, a reason for why you're an employee, and this is something the employer would have to respect. There's no question about it, and I do think CERB has identified this one very early on as one of the legitimate criteria for someone to apply.
They have, although obviously the employee should keep in mind, for example, if there's two people laid off, that only one of them may be able to claim, or one person's laid off and the other person's asked to return to work, and they're claiming childcare, it may be that their partner can look after the children. So it just has to practically make sense as well under the circumstances.
Oh, good point. Excellent. Did you want to add anything to that, Stephen?
I think that it's important, again, back to understanding your employees and what they're going through. Like, I know what we're hearing a lot of business, and again, it depends on the nature of the work, but for example, if it's something that you are able to still do at home, I'll give the example of myself, for example. So it's PayWorks has kind of come out and said, like, we know this is difficult, especially for everyone, but let's say you have 4 children in multiple different grades at home, and you're now trying to sort of teach them and manage work. Companies are coming out and saying, hey, we're here for you. You're not going to have your wages be affected or anything like that. And they're sort of working with their employees to just make sure that things are as normal as possible as they're going through this time with their children. And of course, providing resources. Mental health is a huge one, not just for employees or employers, but also for children, who it can be kind of a confusing time for them right now. They don't know why they're not back in school. They want to see their friends. FaceTime isn't enough, sort of thing. So it's about having resources to help there as well. Because, as we all know, if they're having a hard time at home or something, having a bad day with the children, then, that can spill into the workplace, which it could already be stressful enough. Now, if it's not the type of job where you're working from home and it's, hey, we have to be home, we don't have anyone else to take care of children, or even if it's a compassionate care type situation where someone might be taking care of a parent or something like that, then it's possible to look into different leave of absences or looking at the CERB. But again, if the employer has the ability to maybe just work some flex hours with the employee and support them in that way, I find that goes a long way, especially on the topic of HR. It's really important what businesses are doing now for their employees. Employees are never going to forget it. So, it's important to be mindful about that. and really making sure that you're doing everything you can to support them.
Wonderful. Those are excellent points too, Stephen. So Terry has a question she would like to ask. So Terry, if you would like to unmute and ask your question, you can do that now.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can see you and hear you. Hello, Terry.
Hello, you all look fabulous. I'm not sure if I combed my hair today, but oh well, I'm tiny, right? And I seem to touch my face a lot. My question has to do with working from home and sort of like privacy issues, confidentiality issues, and what employers can do to make sure their employees are managing that. And you know, we don't have a real robust working from home policy. Perhaps we should have one now. So I'm just wondering if there's any guidelines out there that you can share that would help us create that.
Well, I can tell you, you know, some of the things that we've laid down ourselves, because we did not have a robust working from home policy either. And usually who worked from home were lawyers, and they had code of ethics obligations that they would have to be mindful of. But certainly in terms of practical things, we've insisted that the computer be single access. So it's not a shared computer, family computer, that it be done in isolation so that there's confidentiality if you're talking, that the records, if they are producing paper records on the printer because they're, you know, working through, that they not be put in the normal waste stream, that they be preserved and brought back into our office and put through a secure shredded function. You know, obviously things about not sharing digital codes and the like, there shouldn't be a need for the most part to take files out of the office unless you're, you know, a lawyer or paralegal who have to, in our case, to do more fundamental work. So what's the rationale if you're taking something away from the office? Is it necessary? Is your system robust enough that you can do it electronically and maybe printing on the side from a home? So anything that we can do, but the key thing that we've found, and we have, I think to Stephen's point earlier in terms of support, we were able to go through backlog of old equipment that we have that would have been recycled in the normal course, and we've put out that old equipment to our employees so they weren't using the family computer and they were sole generating. I think whether it's a business, nonprofit, whatever it is, make sure that you are taking those types of steps to make sure that the business records are preserved, that they're, you know, we have a 2-access VPN system, so that, you know, you need to, yeah, well, that means that it shows up on my Android fueled by BlackBerry. It's the only way they got my BlackBerry away from me is I couldn't do it on my old BlackBerry. But essentially it's a prompt on your smartphone that accepts that someone's logging in the system under your name. Oh. So you don't get just to go in by one code. So if you have the capacity in your business to institute those extra steps of privacy,
you may know it as a 2-factor authentication as well.
2-factor,
yeah, Anna Maria knows it by that. I just know it by a 2-step VPN process. Anyways, it shows up in my smartphone and I'm supposed to say agree when I'm trying to sign in on my computer. So anything that your system allows you to do, but take those physical steps. If people are on the phone, they should be using headphones so that people can't hear conversations. All those things that you would normally provide in terms of an office ability to close the door, thinking about that way, but really control from a paper point of view what's leaving your office, and from a paper retaining. Don't allow people, you don't want it showing up at the recycling facility with intact records from your clients, your donors, your employees. Make sure you handle that in a separate way and insist on it being brought back into the office, because it's not an excuse for you to say, well, the employer put it in, and the employee put it out in their blue bag on Wednesday morning. So those are the things, Terry, that I think you can think of. And if you you know, you can institute very quickly, without doing a detailed policy, a checklist of those types of things and have the employee sign off, recognizing that they are understanding of those rules and have complied, and an obligation to advise if there's been any potential breach of any of those rules.
You'll see me smiling. I'm looking at both Jessica and Chelsea, and I think the chamber could probably put together a checklist to send out to employers based on that discussion. Yeah. So we'll talk offline and figure out who that gets assigned to, and we'll get that in the hands of our employers as well.
Okay, great.
Several things throughout the webinar on different PDF documents that both Patterson and PayWorks have, and links to resources. So after this webinar, we will send out a package of links and information for everyone who was on this call. And we'll also be posting a video of the session on our YouTube channel for access after. I do have one more question that has been submitted, and then we'll have some closing comments from our group. Terry, was there something you wanted to add, or is that
just the only other thing would be, is anybody compensating their employees for their electricity use? I mean, they're working from home. I've seen that for some places, and just wondering if that's kind of standard, or just, oh, that's really special if someone does that.
Yeah, and I think we'll start with Stephen on this, because there are some ways through payroll and claiming taxes as well that employees can recoup some of those costs. So Stephen, we'll start with you, and then we'll go back to Dennis on that. I guess, what is an employer's obligation for compensation at these times?
Well, I guess it all depends on the nature of what the employee was doing, before. Take it for example, if they were a sales representative or something like that, and they are using, there's a document, T2200 that could be filled out, if they are using, some resources from home to perform their work. So again, depending on the nature of what they're doing, if that's something that is now in play, then the business can look at that. It's not something that the business is giving the employee. It's just saying, hey, we're acknowledging and that yes, you are using things from home for this, and then they can use that when they submit their taxes. As far as what other, offering computers or sending out, paper, whatever it is that they need, I think it's back to, if you have the resources to be able to support your employees, then I think it would be a good thing to do. But back on the IT world and phishing scams, for example, that's a big one. We have a post going out on that, and I'll share some information there as well. But now is an extremely important time to be aware of phishing emails, because everybody's on email, right? And so it's really important, make sure your antivirus software is up to date. If you don't have an IT department, so again, I think if you have an IT department and you're a larger company, I'm not saying that you won't have challenges, but in a lot of cases, it's small business that says, well, I don't know, I can't remember the last time I updated my antivirus software. I'm not sure if I have it. I just kind of go on here and do my work. And it's, now it's probably a really good time to take a look at that. And also best practices when working remotely. We've shared a few things, but, be mindful of what's in your background. Be mindful of, what's reflecting off my glasses. If somebody were to take a screenshot of something in the background, is there anything there that they shouldn't be seeing? If you're working in front of a window, could somebody look in that window and see your screen? So there's a lot of different, and again, it depends on the nature of work that you're doing. But it's extremely, extremely important in our line of work, given the nature that we're working with employees and paying them and all the information that we have. So we do not take it lightly. And I think it's extremely important to keep top of mind, especially during these times, because there are individuals out there who, unfortunately will be trying to take advantage of people during these times, and you're going to get some strange emails, and it's going to be, people seemingly wanting to help you. And unfortunately, in some cases, that's not going to be the case. So I would just say to be, as vigilant as possible. If they're, that checklist, sure, I think, yeah, that would be a fantastic idea. And again, we have some information that we can share as well, but just kind of be mindful of that and make sure that employees are mindful of it, because people just don't think about that. Now it's, hey, we're on meetings and Zoom, and they don't always think, well, what's in the background, right? Do I have an employee document somewhere you know, did I hit the screen sharing button by accident on GoToMeeting, and now someone can see my screen where I have information up that people are not supposed to see. So it's things like that, you know, now more than ever, people should try and be very vigilant about that.
Those are excellent points. Was there anything you wanted to add, Dennis or Anna Marie, about, you know, are employers under obligations to offer compensation?
Well, I think, you know, part of it is the big boat analogy, Sherry, that I talked about earlier. I mean, I think there's trade-offs on both sides. If you've got if you've got, you know, the employee that's requesting the ability to return to work from home, maybe there's trade-offs and they have to consider the expenses they're saving versus the expenses. But certainly if they are working from home and there's potential additional expenses, then I think the employer has to understand that that may be a cost of doing the business. You may not have the same scrutiny if you can provide the safe workplace and it's a choice to work from home. So maybe you'd have to consider that. But to the extent that you can anticipate that there are expenses from setting up temporary home offices, then the employer should be open to dealing with those requests.
Excellent. Okay, so the last question that I have in front of me is back into the wage subsidy. So I'll read that for you. I understand that the 75% wage subsidy can be used by companies whose revenue is lower by 30 to 15% from the same period last year, January to April. Will these dates be extended if revenues decrease during the summer months? Have you heard anything on any wiggle room for the extension of the wage subsidy through summer months?
I can comment a little on that, which is just to say currently no, but the legislation that's in place does provide for it that it could be extended, and it may be effective up until the fall. I believe it's early October, the date they have in the legislation that essentially it's in force for. That being said, currently it's only these 3 months. And then there's a fourth kind of line that says we may choose to extend, or such other period as we designate.
Great. Okay, well, Stephen, let's look to you for some closing comments, things that you want to share with the businesses that are here, things that you think that they should know as we move on with our day.
Yeah, no, I just think that it's great that these types of things are happening. You know, that the chamber is bringing everyone together to help answer some questions, and it is nice to be able to see people's faces. I know human contact is a real thing, right? And I think a lot of folks aren't used to that. But no, I just you know, in closing, we're here for all your members. I'm Sherry and anyone else out there. And again, it doesn't, you know, you don't have to be a PayWorks client. If there are questions related to payroll or anything we can do to help be guidance or just, you know, an open ear to bounce ideas off of, then we're definitely here to help. You know, and if anybody, obviously any members have any questions, or they wanting to look at PayWorks for different things like records of employment, HR advisory services, or anything like that, then by all means, let me know. But just for everyone to stay safe and stay sane, make sure you're getting, you know, outside if you can, get some fresh air and some exercise. And I think we'll all have a better appreciation of how connected we are when this comes to an end, and it's onward and upward.
Great. Okay, and Dennis and Anna Marie, any comments from you as we leave our day and go back to work?
Yeah, as you're thinking through HR issues, employment issues, both sides, employee or employer, you really have to think about what you're going to think about the decisions you made when this is all over. And you do everything you need to do to respect, from an employer's perspective, the rights of the employee to be safe, and not only be safe, but feel safe, and to the extent that your resources allow, work with your employees to achieve that. And at the end of the day, if you've exhausted all options, then respect that they are just going to be away from your workplace on a temporary basis until this resumes and the law and the emergency state of emergency is lifted. There are no ironclad absolute rights or wrongs, and those will be written by some small claims adjudicator, some labor code investigator down the road, if that's how it plays out. But right now, just think about how you want to be thought of in the terms of your decision making during this time on both sides of it, and exercise within reason, listening to Dr. Strang, Dr. Tam, listening to their advice, and thinking hard about how your workplace operates and what's reasonable to expect of your employees. And I think if you follow some general thoughts like that, then I think you'll be fine as you try to manage through.
Those are very impactful words. Thank you, Dennis. I'm going to ask Jessica Netsky, who is our Membership Services Coordinator, to talk very briefly about a program that the Chamber does offer to Chamber members that is available and that is advice and free service for those that are a part of it right now. So Jessica, could you share a little bit with us on that?
Yeah, definitely. So the Chamber Group Insurance Plan, which is health benefits that are, can be provided to Chamber members, they have a business assistance service. It is included in every plan at no additional cost, and it is completely confidential. And what that can give people is up to 9 hours of combined legal, accounting, and human resource services per calendar year. And they also do human resource coaching. So if you are having people issues with performance or absenteeism, that sort of thing, which I think a lot of people are having right now, they do have a coaching service that provides 30 minutes of service per call to a maximum of 2 hours per issue. And that's for unlimited issues during the calendar year. If you are interested in any of that information, you can either email me. My email address is oa@tcchamber.ca. You can visit the Chamber Plan website at chamberplan.ca. And if you're not a member of the Chamber Benefits Plan, you can do the same thing. You can visit them there, you can email me, and we can get you in touch with somebody who can give you some more information about it.
And we really feel it's important for people who are already paying and subscribing to a service that they're aware that that is there for them at this point as well. So
absolutely, it's a fantastic service.
So I want to give a huge thank you to Craig and Stephen and Dennis and Anna Marie for providing their expertise to our Chamber members and our business community today. You were valued and appreciated, and we are so grateful that you took time to be with us and give us some information that I know business really needs to hear right now. So again, we will prepare an email out to everyone who had registered for this webinar and send some links and information and PDFs that have been mentioned throughout the past hour and get that in your hands. If you have any questions, the Chamber is here for you. Kelsey Weatherby is our Events and Special Project Coordinator. Jessica Netsky is our Membership Services Coordinator. I'm the Executive Director, and we are diligently dedicated to making sure that the business community is supported at this time. So again, thank you everyone for being here today.